Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gustavo Coutinho.
And I'm Beatriz Marinho. We're students at Harvard College, and it is a great honor to introduce the panel, More Impact, Technology as a Driver of Transformation.
And talking about impact, we could not have selected better speakers. First, I would like to introduce Salman Khan, the CEO of Khan Academy, a non-profit organization with the mission of providing free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And with that, I would like to welcome Mr. Khan.
We will also welcome Denis Mizne, CEO of Fundação Lemann, a non-profit organization dedicated to solving social problems in Brazil. Fundação Lemann works to ensure that all Brazilian children have access to high-quality public education.
We will first begin with a presentation from Mr. Khan, and Dennis will join at the stage shortly for the discussion. Thank you.
So I like to start these types of presentations really just understanding the audience. So how many of you are Brazilian students? Okay. How many of you are non-Brazilian students? Okay. And how many of you are from Brazil but not a student? Okay. I think I understand the crowd quite well. So as introduced, we're a not-for-profit, mission-free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And a lot of folks associate us with videos that I started making for my family. And that is still a big part of what Khan Academy is. But as you'll see, we have much, much bigger ambitions, and it's much, much more than just videos. But just to get a sense of it, what at least the videos look like, I'll show you this montage.
All of these interactions are just due to the gravity.
This is an age right after Isaac Newton.
I'm told the humidity makes it feel hotter. Why is this?
Excellent question, LeBron.
And you can just see the pleasure he had.
The right to privacy as such is not spelled out in the Constitution. Of course, the word liberty is.
Things actually can interbreed, although for these two in particular, it seems like the mechanics would get kind of difficult.
And I can keep playing around with these numbers and see what kind of colors I can come up with.
If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
I thought Euler's identity is always popular. But as I mentioned, it's much more than just videos. These are screenshots from where you go to the site. Students can get as much practice as they need, not just in math, but in the humanities and in subjects in science. You have this shows the breadth of the content, 30, 40 courses and in over 36 languages of the world. And this is just a snapshot of where we are now. 70 plus million registered users being used in almost every country in some way, shape, or form. Before I talk more about where we are and where we're going, I'll tell you a little bit of how it got started. And I think some of you know pieces of it, but and I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs in this audience, so you might kind of appreciate this somewhat surprising journey. You go back to 2004. I was a year out of business school. I was actually based in Boston, not too far from here. I was an analyst at a very small hedge fund. I had just gotten married, and my family from New Orleans was visiting. And it just came out of conversation that my 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble in math because she had done badly on an exam the previous year. They put her into essentially a remedial math class at her school in New Orleans. And so I offered to tutor her. She agreed. She goes back to New Orleans. I start tutoring every day after work, after school for her. And slowly but surely, she got caught up with her class. She gets a little bit ahead of her class. At that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. And I called up her school, and I said, I really think Nadia Rahman should be able to retake that placement exam from last year. They said, who are you? And I said, I'm her cousin. And they surprisingly let her retake it, and the same Nadia who was being placed into a remedial math class was now placed into an advanced math class. So I was hooked. It was a little small intervention on my part. I was able to connect with my cousin, so I started working with Nadia's younger brothers. And then over the next 18 months, a few things happened. The firm I was working for, we moved out to Northern California, to Silicon Valley. But more relevant to this story, word gets around my family that free tutoring is going on. And so I find myself every day after work with about 10, 15 cousins, family, friends all over the country. And I was getting on a conference line trying to tutor them. And even at that early stage, I saw a common pattern. Even my cousins who were A or B students, the reason why they were having trouble is that they just had gaps in their knowledge. And so the first Khan Academy was actually a software platform where I would create exercises and they would get feedback immediately, and then I would, as their teacher, would be able to see what they're up to. And I remember I was showing this off at a dinner party in 2006, and my friend, the host, his name's Zuli, have to give him full credit. He says, well, this is all cool, Sal. You know, I see what this is doing. It's making sure people don't have gaps that keep them from learning in the future. But how are you scaling up your actual lessons? And I said, you know, Zuli, it's hard to do now with 15 cousins, what I was originally doing for a few. And he says, well, why don't you record some of your lessons as videos and upload them onto YouTube for your family? And I immediately said, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano, not serious mathematics. But I went home that weekend. I got over the idea that it wasn't my idea. And I decided to give it a shot. And I started making things I saw my cousins were having difficulty with. I started telling them, watch it ahead of time. That way when we get on the phone, we can get deeper. And after about a month, I asked for feedback, and they somewhat famously told me that they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And it's counterintuitive at first, but it makes a lot of sense from their point of view. When you're trying to learn something the first time, it could be stressful when a very well-intentioned cousin or a parent is waiting for you to learn it. But now they could get it at their own time, their own pace. They could get the explanations in the middle of the night. They can pause. They could repeat. If they were in 9th grade and they had a gap in 5th grade, they didn't have to be embarrassed. No one would judge them. They could just go and fill in that gap. So I took it as positive feedback. I kept going. It soon became clear that people who were not my cousins were watching. And at first, I just saw the view count go up. Then the comments started to come in. Some of those early comments were just a lot of thank yous from people all over the world. And even that I thought was a pretty big deal. I don't know how much time you spend on YouTube. Most of the comments are not thank you. They're a little edgier. But then the comments got more intense. People started writing, this is the reason I was able to not fail my math class. This is the reason why I feel like I used to hate science and now I want to become a physicist. I'm leaving the military and I haven't seen math for 10 years, but this is what's allowing me to bridge back to college. I remember in those early days, this was spring of 2007, I brought my wife over. I was like, this is incredible. A mother had written saying that her 2 sons had a learning disability, and these videos were the only way that they were able to keep up with their class. And because of that, her and her entire family were praying for me and my entire family. And you can imagine how especially powerful that was for me. You have to remember, my day job, I was working as an analyst at a hedge fund. And I wasn't used to people praying for me, at least in that way. And so I kept going. You fast forward to fall of 2009, there was about 50,000 people who were using the videos and the practice platform that I had made. And frankly, I had trouble focusing on my day job. So my wife and I, we looked at our finances. We had some money saved up, essentially for a down payment for our house. But we said, you know, the social return on investment here seems really off the charts, immeasurable, really. It could reach one day millions or billions of people for many generations to come. And so I quit my job, set up Khan Academy as a not-for-profit organization. And I think anytime you do anything entrepreneurial, you have to, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, you have to start with that delusional optimism. You have to assume that, okay, surely the world will recognize the value here. And what typically happens is you take the plunge, and the early days are tough. For me, a lot of those first conversations that sounded good at first, but then eventually would end with, well, this isn't exactly what we want to fund, or our budget is already allocated for this year. And so you can imagine as you go 7, 8 months into this, we were digging into our savings about $5,000 a month. Our first child had just been born. It was a stressful time. I would wake up in the middle of the night. You know, what have I done to not just my career, but now I had a small family. You know, it's easy to talk about it now. And just as that was happening, a donation came in. And it was a $10,000 donation. I was getting, you know, before that people were giving $10, $20. If it was any of you, thank you. But all of a sudden a $10,000 donation came in. It came from someone named Ann Doerr. I immediately emailed her. I said, you know, thank you so much for this incredibly generous donation. This is the largest donation that Khan Academy has ever received. If we were a physical school, you would now have a building named after you. And Anne immediately emails back and says, well, I use your stuff with my daughters. I even use it myself. I had done stuff about the financial crisis and things like that. And Anne said, I would love to meet and learn more. So a week later, we're at an Indian restaurant over lunch, and Anne asks me, so what's your goal here? And so I say, when you apply to be a not-for-profit, there's a part of the form that says mission, : and they give you about a line and a half. And I filled out a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And Anne said, well, that's ambitious. How do you see yourself doing that? And I clarified. I said, no, it's a mission statement. I don't think I'm just going to be able to check it off this weekend and then move on to healthcare or something. I have some ideas. But I showed her. I showed her how the view count was growing. I used to walk around with a notebook of testimonials from people all over the world. She was familiar with the videos, but I showed her this practice platform, and I said, this is the real meat. It's nice to get explanations, but to really learn something, you have to do practice, get things right, get things wrong, get immediate feedback, and then progress at your own time and pace. I showed her some teacher tools. I was using them myself, but I said one day I want teachers to be able to do this so that they can individualize instruction to the needs, to really empower teachers with the tools that other industries have had for so long. I'd want to translate the videos into the languages of the world. And Anne said, well, you've made a lot of progress here. I only have one question. How are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. And she processes that. We part ways. 10 minutes later, I'm driving into my driveway, and I get a text message from Anne, and it says, you really need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. So that was a good day. That was a little bit. And then, frankly, that was the beginning of a whole series of crazier and crazier events. A month later, I was running a summer camp with middle school students. The whole reason I was doing this is I never viewed virtual as somehow a replacement for the physical. Ideally, they work hand in hand. If students can get practice at their own time and pace and lectures at their own time and pace, it frees up the physical classroom to do higher order things, simulations, games, peer-to-peer tutoring, the teacher to be able to do focused interventions on what students need. And I was in the middle of one of these simulations. I had 6 students playing a game of Risk, and then the other 20 were trading securities based on the outcome of the game of Risk. It's a good game. And while that was happening, I started getting text messages from Anne, which you can imagine I now take very seriously. And it wasn't clear what order they came in. They were a little bit cryptic. But Anne's writing, she says, I'm at the Aspen Ideas Festival in Aspen, Colorado. I'm in the main pavilion. Bill Gates being interviewed on stage. Last 5 minutes talking about Khan Academy. So I didn't know what to make of this. So I immediately boot the nearest 7th grader off of a computer, and I start looking for some evidence of this thing that Anne is talking about. And actually, I was able to find the footage, and this is what I saw.
There's a new website that I've just been using with my kids recently called Khan Academy, Khan. Just one guy doing some unbelievable 15-minute tutorials. My favorite vignette is that guy, Salman Khan. He was a hedge fund guy making lots of money, and he quit to do these little web videos. And so we've moved, I'd say, about 160 IQ points from the hedge fund category into the teaching many people in a leveraged way category. So, that was a good day, the day that his wife let him quit his job.
Well, you could... So you guys could appreciate what I was probably, I was literally shaking when I saw that. I was like, is this really happening? I remember I went home that night to dinner. I remember it clearly still, even though it was almost 10 years ago. And I showed my wife this video, and I remember telling her, what do I do now? What's the protocol here? Do I call him? And assuming he's not listed. And they left me in that limbo state for about 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I'm in Khan Academy's worldwide headquarters, which was my walk-in closet. And I'm about to record a video, and then I see my cell phone rings. It's a Seattle number. I answer it. Hello? Hi, this is Larry Cohen. I'm Bill Gates' chief of staff. You might have heard that Bill's a fan. Yeah, I heard that. And if you're free over the next few weeks, we would love to fly you up to Seattle and learn more about what you're doing and maybe ways to work together. And I was looking at my calendar for the month. completely blank. And I said, yeah, you know, Wednesday I have to cut my nails, do some laundry, but I think I can meet Bill. So we had that meeting, very similar to the meeting with Anne. What would you do with more resources? Translate languages of the world, build out the teacher platform, the practice platform, cover all the core subjects from kindergarten, or actually pre-K, all the way through the core of college. And at the same time, folks from Google reached out. And so all of a sudden, you know, only a few months before that, I was questioning whether I had ruined my family's future. Everything actually came together, and we were able to get some of the initial funding to get office space, start hiring up a team. And what we immediately started working on was that software that I'd started doing for my cousins. And these are screenshots more current from our mobile app. And I show this to show how we think about practice and how we think about progression. The way it works is a student will work on, say, something like what you see on the left, what's the slope of the line? And once the system has determined that the student understands that, and there's multiple ways they do just that, then they see problems like that mixed in with others, then the system says, okay, now they're ready to move to maybe something that builds on that. It might be something like graphing a line. And once you've mastered that, you move on to something maybe graphing systems of equations. And in a lot of ways, what I just mentioned is common sense. But I point out that's not the way that a traditional academic model is structured. In a traditional academic model, what you do is you group students by age, and around middle school, sometimes perceived ability, and you move them ahead at a fixed pace. And in a traditional model, let's say we're in a pre-algebra class, or we're learning exponents. What'll happen is the teacher will give a lecture on exponents, we'll go home, do homework on it, then there'll be another next day we'll review homework, lecture homework. That goes on for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then we have a test. And on that test, let's say I get a 70%, you get an 80%, you get a 95%, even though that test has identified gaps in our knowledge. What was that 30% that I didn't know? Even the A student, what was the 5% she didn't know? It might have been a careless error, or it might have been something really important. What happens when you raise something to the 0th power? Even though we identified those gaps, the whole class will then move on to the next concept. So they're moving before they're mastering the concept, and then the next concept's going to be built on those gaps. And so to appreciate how absurd this is, imagine if we did other things in our life that way. Say, home building. So you bring in the contractor, and you say, we have 2 weeks to build the foundation, do what you can. So they do what they can, maybe the supplies don't come, maybe it rains. 2 weeks later, the inspector comes and says, okay, the concrete's still wet there, this part isn't quite up to code, I'll give it a 70%. And you say, great, that's a C or a D, let's build the first floor. Same thing, 3 weeks, do what you can. 3 weeks later, the inspector comes and says, okay, I'll give it a 85%. And you say, okay, great, that's a B. Let's build the second floor. And while you're building the second floor, the whole structure collapses. And if the reaction is what people often have to education, they'll say, oh, maybe you need a better contractor, or maybe you need more inspection. Maybe that's part of it, but what's really flawed is the process. You're artificially constraining when to do something, pretty much ensuring a variable outcome, and in education, that's the A, B, C, D, F, and that even though you've identified those gaps, you then move on and you build on those gaps, which at some point will crumble and you hit a wall. So instead of doing that, the opposite is hold variable when and how long you can work on something, and ensure that everyone gets to that A level. Make sure everyone gets mastery. And to appreciate how much potential there is out in the world if we just let people learn in this way, I'll show you this next video.
So I actually dropped out of high school twice, both during my freshman year. And when I eventually came back, I was put in sort of lower level math and science classes because I was so behind. Then I discovered Khan Academy, and I was able to skip 2 years worth of math just through using the site. And I came into school, I took the exam with students who had been enrolled in the class all year, and I was actually able to get the highest or the second highest scores in the class. So for me, Khan Academy really changed the trajectory of my entire life, because without it, I don't think I ever really would have been inspired to learn and to love math and to love science. I ended up graduating as a valedictorian and going on to Princeton, where I'm now a computer science major, and I'm absolutely passionate about learning about computers, about math, about science. And without Khan Academy, I don't think that these things would really matter to me the way that they do today.
There's a fun epilogue to that story. When we heard he's a computer science major, he actually ended up interviewing for a full-time job, and we ended up hiring him, and he's been an amazing engineer. So in a very strange way, we're helping to solve our own labor problems. So, one thing that I always point out, Khan Academy is much more than me. We're over 200 folks. We're tens of thousands of people who have helped translate and subtitle content. And it's through the support of many. And this is just a list of some of our biggest supporters. And especially in a Brazilian context, the Lemann Foundation has been key to support the work that we do generally and the work that we're going to do we have been doing in Brazil and hope to do in the future. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And so just touching on outside the world, as our mission is, a lot of you all are probably wondering, what about the rest of the planet? And all of these are pictures of Khan Academy being used in interesting ways, and they're all actually quite incredible stories, and they're all actually work done by other partner organizations that are out there in the field. But probably the most interesting one here is in the top right. I used to give talks like this and say, who knows, maybe it'll one day be used in Mongolia. And then one day I got actually a letter with a video testimonial from that young girl in the top right from Mongolia. And her name is Zaya, and she sent a video like Charlie's, and I immediately assumed that she's middle class, upper middle class. Her English was quite good. She had access to the internet. But then I read her email more carefully, and it turns out that there was a group of engineers from Cisco that were going out to Mongolia during their vacations and setting up computer labs with internet in orphanages. And so what you see in the top right there, those are the orphan girls using Khan Academy, and Zaya was one of those orphans. And that by itself was a pretty incredible story for us. But like Charlie's story, after Zaya has since graduated from high school, and she's now one of the top contributors to Khan Academy in the Mongolian language. So once again, if we allow people to unlock their potential, there's a multiplier effect that just keeps going. And another similar story, that this is more recent, about 7, 8 years ago, Taliban take over a town in Afghanistan, and they forbid all of the young girls from going to school. And there's one girl in particular, Sultana. She was 12 or 13 years old. They directly threaten her with acid attacks. I mean, horrible, horrible stuff. So she doesn't go to school. She's at home. She's doing literally 10, 12 hours of chores a day. But her brother-in-law sees that she's really curious. She wants to read whatever she can find. So he gets her a computer with an internet connection. And so that becomes her lifeline to the world. And she finds Khan Academy. First she teaches herself English. Then she finds Khan Academy. And then Khan Academy becomes what she does every waking moment when she's not doing chores. And she starts at not even a middle school level. She starts at an elementary school level. And for her, the aha was about 6 months into that when she realized she was learning more than her brothers who were allowed to go to school. And so she keeps going. And she ends up learning algebra and trigonometry and calculus and statistics and physics, chemistry, biology. And she decides that she wants to become a physicist. And she wants to study physics in the United States. And so she hears that there's a test called the SAT that helps you get admission into US colleges. It's not administered in Afghanistan. So she smuggles herself across one of the most dangerous borders in the world, a 30-hour illegal journey. She lies to her parents to smuggle herself into Pakistan to take the SAT. So if any of you have siblings who are complaining about taking the SAT on a Saturday morning, tell them this story. She does unusually well, and then that's actually when I find out about her. One of the people she was pen pals with tried to contact me. When I found out the story, I tried to email folks. Luckily, Nicholas Kristof, who writes for the New York Times, wrote this piece, Meet Sultana, the Taliban's Worst Fear. And because of this, she was able to get political asylum. And she's now doing physics research with some of the top physicists in the world. Once again, just how much potential there is if we let people tap into it. So as you... Oh. So you can imagine a very important part of our charter is to reach as many people as we can around the world, not just translate the videos, but localize it. And Brazilian Portuguese is one of our highest priorities in this regards. And just to appreciate what at least the videos look like in other languages, I will show you this.
Me comí 2 cuartos de pizza.
L'hypoténuse commune, ok.
7, 13, 15.
और मैं इस हाथ से इस ब्लॉक को धकेलने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ इस डायरेक्शन में.
توجد قطعتين من معدن النحاس والزنك.
Puis
R به توان 2 ضرب در
כי הנקודה שבה שוק הסיום של הזווית חותכת את מעגל היחידה.
Ili muweze kuelewa na kuweza.
Into yokuqala ekufuneka siyazi kukuba kubani
16 bölü 16 1'e eşittir.
Muitas e muitas outras coisas importantes.
I'm Zaya from Mongolia. Your videos are so interesting and funny. Make more lessons.
So these are just more pictures of students using Khan Academy around the world. You know, whenever I see this and we get letters, it reminds me of what an opportunity we have in time and space and history. And I always give people this thought experiment. If we were to go back in time 500 or 1,000 years, you would have seen that about 20% of men and about 10% of women could read. And I suspect that if you went to someone who could read, say a member of the clergy, and said, what percentage of the population do you think is even capable of reading? They might have said, well, today it's 10, 20%, maybe with a great education system, 30, 40%. But you fast forward to today, and because of mass public education, we know that pretty close to 100% of the population is capable of reading. But if I were to ask any of y'all a similar question, what percentage of the population today is capable of pushing the frontiers of medical research, or starting the next great tech company, or writing the next great novel? A lot of y'all might say, well, today it's maybe 1%, maybe with a great education system it's 5, 10%. But what if that's because we have the same blinders on that clergy member would have had 500 or 1,000 years ago? That we're making that assumption just based on our experience, an experience where every student has been moved at the set pace. And when those gaps keep forming, and then at some point we see so many of our peers fall off when they take an algebra class, or when they take a trigonometry class or a physics class, what if we have the tools to empower students and empower teachers, and it's free and it's universally available, where they can learn at their own pace, when they can master concepts? And the more that I see how much potential gets unlocked from this, from the Charlies and the Zayas, and frankly, tens of millions of students around the world, I'm getting more and more convinced personally that it's not just 20, 30, 40%. I actually think over the next generation or two, we can get a world where pretty close to 100% of the population is capable of having access to their full potential in a way that today we think is only reserved for basic things like clean drinking water or shelter. And we can make that access to your true potential just a fundamental human right. Thank you. Oh, thanks. And Dennis, I think
I think it's just, I mean, fascinating, and the story and everything you showed. And I think the whole idea here is that we have a chance to discuss a little bit like exactly what you just said, right? What's the potential, how technology can impact people's lives. And I think just to give you like some context on our partnership, for a long time, we heard about Khan Academy, I think was the first time in 2011, and we started to try to figure out, okay, the Lemann Foundation was just trying to figure out how can we impact that large-scale education in Brazil. And technology seemed to be something that we should definitely be thinking about. And Khan Academy seemed like the best choice that we could do. The main issue was like, how can we get to Salman Khan, right? How do we get there? And we tried multiple ways, and we sent emails and didn't find a way to connect. And then because of Sal's, bad, past of a hedge fund analyst, my brother, who's here actually and worked in the hedge fund industry, said, oh, I actually met this guy some time ago, and I think I still have his email from that time. And we found this email, and I sent you an email, and then you answered it. I went to Mountain View, and they set a meeting in a cafe, and I said, oh, they're trying to figure out who we are, and before committing, they don't want us to see their huge structure. And then when we finally got to see the structure, it was like, a small room with like everybody packed inside, maybe 10 people working, and very early days. And they made this great commitment of trying to make Brazil one of the first places where Khan Academy was going to expand. And we brought it to Brazil, and we said, let's try to do it inside the school system. And the story that I remember the most is I went to visit, we started in 3 schools in the periphery of Sao Paulo. And we went to these schools, we provided everything, the computers, the technology, the internet, the training for the teachers, and we started to look at how this was going to go. And I was going to visit the school 3 weeks in this program was started. And I looked at the data because we were able to see the data on every student, right? And we looked at it, and at the time we only had like few contents translated, 21 contents in math. And I see like most kids did 2 or 3 parts of the content. And there is this one kid, Mateus, who did 21, all of it, right? So I say, wow, this is fantastic. 3 weeks, the guy covered everything. We go to the school, we meet the teacher, and I approach the teacher and I say, so tell me about this Mateus kid, you know, what's going on? And he said, well, Mateus, who is Mateus, right? And it's, unfortunately, it's not a joke, right? Because for a teacher in a non-technological classroom, unless you are a phenomenal teacher, it's really hard to differentiate a student who is super advanced from a student who is like way behind, right? So the power of personalization of learning, not only in terms of just giving access to kids who are not in school, as most of the examples were, but just inside the real classroom, I think are pretty powerful. So fast forward, and we'll get to questions, is today we have about 3 million students in Brazil who already use Khan Academy in Portuguese. I mean, it's a big part, 15% of all the students in elementary and middle school in Brazil. And it has been directly implemented in almost 1,000 schools in Brazil, almost 300,000 students who are regularly using Khan Academy inside their curriculum with their teachers, and the results have been amazing and encouraging. So thanks for this partnership with Brazil, and you're really making a difference in a large-scale community and country out there. Thank you.
I'll just... No, look, it's been on both sides. I remember those days because, you know, we always had this very big mission, Free World Class, but it was really those meetings that got us to even think internationally. I mean, you know, if y'all didn't, we probably wouldn't have broadened our aperture in that. So it was really good that the Lemann Foundation just kind of pulled us. And Brazil is the geography outside of the United States where we are the most developed. And in some ways, you know, a lot of the work that we've done in partnership, I think has leapfrogged the work that has gone on in the United States.
So, Sal, you've been there. I mean, we just had a panel on HackBrazil, and we saw these entrepreneurs. That's a very entrepreneurial story. You told a little bit. How do you think about like people here wanting to go in education, maybe ed tech? You don't have that many, like if you look at fintech, if you look at other areas, you see like major successful stories. Why should people go to ed tech? Why should they become entrepreneurs in this area?
Yeah, and you know, I'll say there, you know, you could be a social entrepreneur, you can be a for-profit entrepreneur, you could be something in between, and it's every sector needs all of the above. I think education and healthcare are actually 2 of the spaces that are so essential to humanity, to living the lives that we all aspire to, but they're probably 2 of the furthest behind. Now, I think the reason is, and that's why, you know, the reason why we decided to go the not-for-profit route, although that's not the only route that you could go, but we made that decision because there's this, I'm a big believer in markets, but sometimes where you have the purchasers, the decision makers, and the users are different people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes markets don't lead to the outcome, or they're not an outcome that's consistent with our values. You know, in things like education, you don't want it just for the people who could pay, or the schools that could pay. You want it for everyone. So that was our decision. But what I would say is, regardless of whether you do for-profit or non-profit, the closer that you can get to the problem, the closer, you know, whatever aspect of education or any industry that you're trying to solve, you know, it's easy sometimes to theoretically say, oh, this seems like it's not working. Let me write a business plan. And that has worked for some people. But my mindset is definitely more of, go try to do it by hand. So it was a little bit of a blessing that I had this opportunity to work with my cousins and try to understand them. And then I was their teacher, and then I understood that. The other advice I would give for any entrepreneur is, you know, in some ways I was having my cake and eat it too. I was able to have my career for a while the idea was developing and while I was getting data points that there was a real there. And even then it was, as you heard, very scary and very stressful. But I always tell, especially young entrepreneurs, you know, it's good to sometimes work in the more traditional routes to build your skills, your resume, get mentorship, but always leave a little bit of space for you to fiddle and try things out. And then you might discover your entrepreneurial passion or some other passion.
And when you look at, you start with Khan Academy and you're, reaching hundreds of millions of people, and they are watching the videos and you're seeing the potential. And I'd like to know more about how do you think this could be like a true partnership inside the school system? How you're seeing, I know Khan Academy is doing more and more to that, so why did you move towards this route of working more with the school districts, and how do you think this can play out in the future?
Yeah, I mean, this is, and we've been in this journey together for almost 10 years now, and there's really two use cases, big use cases of Khan Academy. One we call independent learners, and that would be the Charlie Marsh, the Zayas and Sultanas. They're coming on their own. Sometimes they're motivated by a school to come, but they're, for the most part, deciding to say, hey, I need help with something. But we realize if we want to really move the dial for cities, for states, for countries, we have to make sure that we're reaching all of the kids. And the only way that you reach all of the kids is if you work with the system. And we're seeing that, we've had a partnership with the College Board around the SAT, where Khan Academy is now the official practice for the SAT. And by plugging into the system there, we have reached over 60% of all kids who take the SAT. So it's a large chunk of the children globally who do that. And so what we've been doing now is, what more do we need to do to really support teachers and districts in classrooms? So we've always had teacher tools, but now we're exploring ways to go with large urban school districts, and actually rural areas too that have high need, and say, hey, superintendent or leader of the district, what do you need to reach every student? And they're usually telling us stuff like, we need better teacher training, we need better support, we need to integrate our rostering systems, we need data analytics on what's going on, so that we want to plug it in with our assessment system so we can measure efficacy. And so that's the kind of, I would say, the groundwork that we're starting to do. And it's very promising. There's some very big districts actually around the world that seem to want to move this way. So I think that's what does it for us in classrooms. And I think on the independent learner side, we're going to continue to explore, actually for all students, ways to just make it more engaging, more addictive in a good way, and then even ways to eventually prove what you know, that not only did you learn it on Khan Academy, but you have evidence that you can show to other people.
Do you think, a lot of people in the audience and in the other panels who might be here are like policymakers, people working in government, you have people from Congress here. If a country wants really to accelerate the use of technology in their education system, what should they be thinking about? Like, what are the key drivers, you think, that would be able to make Khan Academy or other interesting innovations to be able to reach the classrooms?
Well, there's a baseline. You do need technology access. The world has gone a long way since 2010, 2011 there, but it's still not perfect. Mobile access is pretty common, at least at home. If I were a policymaker, the easy wins are, one, just let everyone know that these types of resources are available. It is free, it is world-class, more efficacy studies done on things like this than almost anything out there. And I think in a lot of communities, people have trouble believing that something free could be better than some of the things folks pay for. So I think anything we can do to amplify and get the message. We did a survey at American colleges, and we asked random students, has Khan Academy had a meaningful impact on your education? And we were hoping 5 or 10% would say yes, 60% said yes. And then the students who were the first generation in their family to go to college, so these are underserved students historically that normally struggle either getting to college or staying in college, 65% of them said that it had a meaningful impact. And what they told us is this is the tutor their family couldn't afford, these are the level of rigor that their school might not have been able to give, that we were able to offer classes that prepared them for university that was not even offered at that level in their local high school. So step one, technology access. Step two, let every parent and teacher and student in Brazil know that this exists, it's free, it's accessible. And then I think step three is, I know there's this big, the Brazilian National Common Core, which I think is going to be great. It's going to make it easier for everyone to make tools for all of Brazil. It's going to up the standards. And I think as the curriculum develops, as long as there's a space for the personalized learning. We're doing this in the United States as well, where you have your grade level curriculum that moves the students together, and that has value too. But we know that at any grade level, especially in high need schools, some kids are 2 grade levels behind, some kids are like Mateo's who are ready to go ahead. And so at least an hour a week, and we've even done some stuff with you where we're seeing even that hour a week can lead to fairly strong gains for students. And so if we can carve out, let's say, 1 day a week, either in class or in the computer lab or at home on the mobile phone, and make that really a national priority, I think we would actually be able to move the dial.
And I remember that, for a long time people would come and say, oh, I'm using Khan Academy this way, and I'm integrating into a school this way, or I'm using it in an after-school program, and at some point you said, oh, I'm going to create my own school, and I'm going to see how this would play out if I actually control the whole thing. And now you have Khan Lab School in Mountain View in California, and can you tell us a little bit about that, and how is the school working, and if, how different is it from a regular school that most people here are attending or attended?
Yeah, it was 2011, around the first time we met, and I had all these ideas about how a classroom could learn at their own time and pace. And I said, well, if students can get micro lectures at their time and pace, if they can get feedback, if teachers are getting data and can do focused interventions, well, it frees up the classroom. I was talking about those simulations. You could do peer-to-peer learning. And then there's other things that had nothing to do with technology. But I was like, well, why do you have to separate kids by age then? Why do you have to separate them by perceived ability? Maybe you could get the older kids teaching the younger kids. Maybe you could, why this notion of a summer vacation or you'll have winter vacation? People aren't farmers anymore for the most part. That's lost time. And all the data shows that kids actually move backward during that time. Also, after school, that's actually the biggest, in my mind, one of the biggest sources of inequity between the middle and upper middle class and the poor, in that the middle and upper middle class can actually oftentimes send their kids to enriching things in the summer and after school while the poor can't. So we said, okay, what if we had a school that was full year, full day, but it leveraged technology to make the classroom more human. So they're able to do more peer-to-peer interaction, that a student, where they are academically, is not bound by what age they are, that there's no stigma if they have to go back or go forward. So we did that, and I got to say, when you do it in practice, it's much harder when you're trying things out. And actually, the hardest thing to do is when things work, to keep changing it. Because it's very easy to get into kind of a comfort zone around it. But we're year 5. The school's 170 kids now. The first kids are going to go to college in about a year and a half. But so far, so good. And I would say we're about 2 years away from talking more publicly about it. Because the whole goal of the school isn't just for me or a few people to understand. We really hope to open source the school, so that anyone who wants to take pieces of the school, pieces of the curriculum, start their own school, or take parts and put it into traditional schools, we want that to happen.
So I remember when I started going to California and to see these innovations in technology and education, and you would visit schools like Summit Public Schools or High Tech High or others, and you see all these, Khan Academy and other things coming, and MOOCs, and the whole, the word that was always repeated was disruption and total transformation. And I would come back to Brazil and I would say, education is going to change dramatically in the next 5 years. And people would say, do you really think in the next 5 years? I said, it could be 2, but let's give it 5, because technology is tricky. Whenever you least expect it, you're just in this, curve where exponentially will change. And now it's been more than 5 years. And you go back to California and you still have Summit Public Schools, and you still have Khan Academy, and you still have other things, but the education system is pretty much the same. And so what do you think it will take to change the education system in a more meaningful way? Does it need to be changed? The things that you explained about building the building, and this is still going on every day for hundreds of millions of students getting a grade. Time is fixed, but quality is not. And so what do you think, why isn't happened yet, and how can this change?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. I think the need is there. All the debate these days is automation and artificial intelligence, and what is going to happen to all of the truck drivers once the trucks drive themselves, what's going to happen to cashiers once you have no more cashiers in stores. As far as I'm concerned, society has 3 options. Option 1 is do nothing, just hope. And some people will point to the Industrial Revolution and say, oh, well, that kind of just worked out. Yes, weavers and horses lost their jobs, but net, there were jobs created. But I always point out, when people talk about the Industrial Revolution, they forget that it coincided with one of the biggest bets that humanity has ever made, and that was free mass public education. It happened at the exact same time as the Industrial Revolution. And I suspect that if we did not have free mass public education, that clergy member from 500 years ago would have been right. We still would be sitting at, even in places like the US, 50, 60% literacy rates, and probably globally you would have 20, 30% literacy rates, and you would not have had the middle class that emerged out of the Industrial Revolution. We probably would have had some techno-feudal state if we didn't invest in mass public education. And so I think as we go into this next inflection point, doing nothing is not okay. In the US, people are talking about things like universal basic income and safety nets. And even if some of that stuff was economically feasible, which I don't see how it pencils out, even if it is, it leaves huge parts of our population without purpose. Their potential gets unused. And so I think our only option is, how do we up-level people so that more and more people can operate at the top, operate in the knowledge economy? And to do that, we have to go into that thought experiment and say, today that's 1, 5, 10% of the population. How do we go to 50, 60, 70% of the population? And the only way it's going to happen, I don't think we have to make a 5% bet, GDP bet, which was mass public education, but I think we have to make a bet where we have to empower tools like this for teachers, allow every child in a country to be able to learn at their own time and pace, alternative credentialing pathways that are legitimized, that employers will say, hey, that is as good as a college degree, that is as good as a high school degree, and then that's our only shot. I agree with you. I do think there are a lot of things that are changing. I think even if 10 years ago I were to tell you that there's the SAT, there's a PSAT exam in the United States, and 70% of all American students take that test. When I took that test, it was a random test. And if you did well, some colleges would send you brochures. Now, 70% of American kids, when they get that result, they can click a link, and that informs the Khan Academy software, every item that they got wrong or right, and then that does weak point, it trains them in reading, writing, to become more college ready, and then we can follow those students and do efficacy studies with 200, 300,000 students every year. And 60% of all kids in America are using that take the SAT. And so that would have seemed like science fiction 10 years ago. So these things are happening, but I agree with you. I think it's like what we see in e-commerce. In the late 90s, they had the craze, then the bubble popped, and then in 2000, everyone became cynical. But if you look now, it's back with force, and I think that is likely to happen.
And you came to both Harvard and MIT, right? So it's a good conference for you to be attending. It's like covering everything. And you have a bunch of people here who are attending those schools, so be careful not to disappoint them. But do you think what do you think is the role of these institutions now, and do you think it's still worth it to do it? Do you think these, higher ed institutions are going to change dramatically as well?
Yeah, I don't think Harvard or MIT need to worry.
Okay, are you feeling better now? Yeah.
But I do think, and I've told every university president I could find, including President Reif here, the value, what I remember of my experience at MIT is you're surrounded by this incredible community. And I met people who made me better, who pushed me and said, oh, I need to become better. Look at how much, look at that cool thing they're doing or they aspire to do. And you're surrounded by professors who literally are changing the world, and so it makes you think bigger. So it's very hard to replace that type of an experience. But I do think universities, you come and you take a 300-person lecture hall, and you're falling asleep, you're going through the ritual. I think that's silly in this day and age. That can happen at students' time and pace, and when 300 people get together, they should be interacting with each other. They should be, the main value is meeting the humans. And I remember too many classes I wouldn't meet. I only knew 5 or 10 of my friends in the class. I wouldn't meet the other 290 people. And so I think the more universities, especially like Harvard and MIT, can move to a more of a free form, you work on projects, you use this incredible network and community to build that, and that I believe, and actually I think the transcript of the future and actually the transcript of the present, yeah, you took this class, you got a GPA, that's nice, but it's really, what have you done? What have you made? So when we hired Khan Academy, we're much more impressed by students who can show things that they've made and they've documented it well, versus just that they got a lot of A's in some classes that may or may not be relevant. I think you will have the emergence of alternative pathways so that if you do want to work in a selective job, you might not have to go to an MIT or a Harvard or any university. But once again, I think that's going to actually clarify things. The universities will say, what are we good at? We're good at research, we're good at creating these communities, and we're good at fostering interaction so that really amazing things happen. While these other tools are also good at creating other pathways into the economy.
So we're reaching the end of our time, but we see, when I come to this conference, it's always like so impressed to see like so much talent, a lot of young people really committed to change. And so I wanted you to have a chance to give them a message of like, a lot of them are going to graduate over the next few years and they can make a decision what they're going to do with their lives with the incredible privilege they have of coming here and being part of this network. So, what do you think, what message do you want to leave them and what contribution can they make to maybe be on stage a few years from now and telling stories like yours? No pressure, no pressure.
I'll say two things. I said it earlier, is, as you go off, I remember being in all of your shoes. You're saying, oh, but I need to make money, and I need to get myself on a good footing. I need to build my resume. But at the same time, you have these dreams of innovating and starting a company or changing or solving some problem in the world. And so what I would say as you go into your career, definitely optimize for experience, optimize for the things that you're going to build your skills, but leave space. If you get into your late 20s and 30s and all you're doing is thinking about next year's salary and next year's bonus, and you've stopped thinking about your dreams that you dream in the dorms with your friends today, make space for that. The other thing I'll finish with, there's a few places that have had the bad judgment of letting me give commencement addresses, MIT being one of them. But I always end with this thought experiment, but that I too use all the time when I'm a little bit afraid of doing something. I say, imagine it's 50 years in the future. You're in your 70s and you're on your couch, you're watching TV, you're watching the news. The times I've given this in America, I say, you're watching the State of the Union address by President Bieber, and
so major improvement. You're optimistic about the future.
It seemed very science fiction a few years ago, but now I think it's a very valid prediction. And but while you're doing that, you're reflecting on your life, and you have a good life. I'm sure everyone here will hopefully, knock on wood, have a very good life, and you'll think about all your successes and your family and all of that. But then you will have regrets, and I think I can predict your regrets. You're going to wish that you spent even more time with your family. You're going to wish that your friends, and you're going to reminisce about your college days a lot. And you're going to wish that at that dance party that you danced a little bit more, and that you went and talked to that person that you thought was pretty interesting and you didn't chicken out. You're going to wish that you took a little bit more risk. You're going to, at that point, your parents might not be around, and you're going to think about them, and you're going to wish that you told them how much they've done for you, et cetera, et cetera. And just as you're doing that, a genie pops up. And it says, you look like a good person, and I've been eavesdropping on your regrets. If you would like to, I'll give you a second chance. And so you say, sure, I'll go for that. So the genie snaps his fingers, and then boom, here you are. You're in your 19, 20, 21-year-old body. All the aches and pains are gone, and you're in your second chance. And so my advice is live this time like it's your second chance. Optimize for all of these things, and have a lot fewer regrets.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is great.
Boa noite, pessoal.
Pessoal, antes de ir embora, temos o anúncio dos finalistas da Hack. Se puderem aguardar.
Anúncio do campeão.
Isso, do campeão. Se puderem aguardar só mais uns minutinhos, por favor.
Boa noite, galera, de novo, estamos de volta. Agora seremos bem breves, mas essa é a parte mais exciting.
Com certeza. A gente quer aproveitar de novo, mais uma vez, para agradecer ao time da HackBrazil, que foi super essencial para fazer tudo isso acontecer. Então, uma salva de palmas. Queria agradecer também mais uma vez aos nossos jurados que estão aqui com a gente. A dedicação deles e o cuidado de discutir, dar as notas e estar aqui com a gente. Muito, muito obrigada. Uma salva de palmas. E gostaria de agradecer também a um parceiro que a gente teve nessa jornada da HackBrazil, que ajudou a gente muito com a avaliação, que foi a Grados. Então, eu queria fazer esse agradecimento também. Uma salva de palmas. Vamos, Gil.
A gente só não pode deixar de agradecer vocês que estavam presentes aqui, vivendo a experiência com a gente, e a turma que está assistindo nas redes sociais, online. Muito obrigado, vocês foram incríveis. Mas, bom, sem mais delongas, a gente vai começar anunciando o segundo colocado. E que rufem os tambores. Vocês não esperavam por essa, hein? Mais um.
Estilo Oscar aqui, gente.
Só não vamos, né?
Mas a gente quer acertar.
Não, né? E o segundo colocado é a equipe Aqualuz. Sobe aqui, gente.
Vamos bater uma foto aqui, gente. Se quiser vir pra cá.
Chega junto, galera. Vamos bater uma foto rápida. Aqui. Parabéns, pessoal. Pra cá, gente.
Tem um membro da equipe da Aqualuz que não pôde estar presente. Eles trouxeram uma imagem aí para fazer uma homenagem a ela. Parabéns, pessoal.
Parabéns,
muito
galera.
bom. Se vocês quiserem aguardar aqui
Podem
só um
aguardar
pouquinho,
aqui,
depois a gente vai tirar uma foto com todo mundo. Mais no canto.
E agora é o grande momento, né?
Agora é o grande momento que realmente vai finalizar a HackBrazil 2019. E eu peço que vocês se preparem agora para o anúncio do grande campeão da HackBrazil. Mais uma vez, rufem os tambores. Opa! Teve todo um estilo agora. Vamos lá. Blue! Sobe aqui, galera!
Vamos subir, galera. Agora é a foto do checão.
Pedro, você está sendo solicitado no palco. Agora vamos tirar uma foto de todo mundo. Sobe, galera. Gente, é isso. A gente ficou muito feliz aí com o resultado e com as 5 equipes finalistas fantásticas. Obrigada pela presença de todos, pelos jurados, pelos parceiros. É isso aí.
E uma ótima Brasil Conference pela frente pra gente.